Welcome to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast for this Thursday. And, of course, it is the 14th of August. You believe that? We've already gone through almost half of August. And, of course, September comes. I don't know where you may be listening to it, but a lot of people listen from Massachusetts and New England. And one of the fascinating things I've learned that's just the reality of New England is the minute September 1st happens, it's like it's all programmed or something. The weather changes. Honest, it'll get warm in September. It'll get warm in October. But I swear to you, the minute September 1st comes, there is a change in the weather. It reminds me of another time someone had moved here to the United States from Europe. And this was in the spring. And I never noticed this until they pointed out. It was still April and there were no leaves on the trees. And I can have a dry sense of humor. So anyway, it turns out the leaves don't really show up until May. Well, in any case, it was still April and I just never picked up and I just never noticed it. So the person said to me, he says, do your trees have any leaves on them? And I went, leaves? As if I had no idea what they were talking about. And that was the first time I realized they don't have any leaves until May. But, it's these little weird weather things we have here in the Northeast. And here it is halfway through August and our summer is almost over. It really drives me nuts because I love summer. It's my favorite season. Then comes autumn, my second favorite season. I do pretty good in spring. It's okay, except I have allergies to pollen, which starts hitting me in March. And then December, winter, as you can assume, is my least favorite season. And what makes it more interesting is I don't feel heat. I don't use air conditioning, don't need to. I'll use a fan. Don't need to. Heat doesn't bother me at all. I'll walk into a room. Literally, this has happened. I've been working in my room. Someone has walked in and said, do you realize that it's 110 degrees in this room? And literally, that's what it was, apparently. And I said, no, I have no idea. And it was. Heat doesn't bother me at all. Cold does. When it gets cold, I really feel it. So that's one of the issues that I deal with this whole weather thing. So here we are, only 2 weeks away, roughly, a little bit more than that, from the end of summer, at least the meteorological end of summer. And that, to me, is so disappointing. Haven't been to the beach at all. Not that I go to the beach that often. Well, in any case, we don't have an interview today. We're going to be talking about various things besides the weather. But we're in the first reading, and as you heard yesterday, one of the things, the main thing was that this was now the turning over of power from Moses to Joshua. And now Moses, who had laid hands on Joshua, and I reminded you that that's one of the most powerful signs, comes from the Bible. They still use it in ordinations. It's also used, by the way, in certain sacraments besides ordination. One of them is Sacrament of the Sick, which I'm fully aware of since I'm now a hospital chaplain. So it's used in various sacraments, this whole thing of laying on of hands. And what it means is to pass on the power of the Holy Spirit. So now this has been transformed. It has been moved from Moses, and now he has transferred. The Holy Spirit has transferred the leadership power over to Joshua. And as I said to you before, this is the same Joshua for whom the song is very, very famous. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and the famous story of the Battle of Jericho. We'll talk about that later on. But in any case, this is the beginning of what we're seeing here. Now, Joshua is going to lead people into the promised land. And of course, what you're going to see there are cultures already in the promised land. And Israel, led by Joshua, also known as the Hebrews, will be moving into the territory and forcing the people off the land. And from our standards here, that is horrendous. But there's a reason for it. And it's not about conquering the other people. It is what I've been saying to you all along, an injection of divine wisdom that is injected into Israel, the Israeli people, and they will become and have become a vessel of God's mercy and love until the time that Christ arrives. And so this is really something that you're not going to understand unless you look at it cosmologically, which is why a lot of people don't understand, especially obviously within the atheist community, because the atheists, obviously, they don't believe in God. And one of the reasons why, and if you haven't heard my explanation on this before, now's your chance to hear my explanation. I consider atheism flat earth thinking. Now, what does that mean? And I'm not really attacking atheists by any stretch of the imagination, but what is atheism all about? I do not see God, therefore God does not exist. That's flat earth thinking. I do not see the curvature of the earth, therefore the earth is flat. And so that's what I mean. And again, when you start looking at things cosmologically, now you look at it from a different perspective. You realize that the universe is bigger than our ability to perceive it. And by doing so, everything works within the context of the bigger reality that is the universe. And this is an important distinction. So when we take that atheist thought, I do not see God, therefore God does not exist, then we realize what we are also doing is determining what exists by what we can perceive. And if we can't perceive it, then it does not exist. And this is a real issue for us to look at, because if you study science, and even, this is one of the reasons why I'm a big devotee of evolution, and especially the science of evolution. Evolution is all about our ability to understand is growing and changing. It's deepening. And therefore, once we understand that and we bring in this factor that says the universe is bigger than our ability at our current stage of evolution to perceive it, then you look at things from a whole different perspective. As a matter of fact, if you read the gospel and read Jesus' words with him having that perspective, that he understands the entire universe in its fullness and we do not, you'll have a whole different focus on Jesus' words. Because what is he saying? There is a greater truth than you can understand presently. Trust my words, Jesus would say, because I'm speaking to you about a greater truth than you can understand right now. And this is a whole key of everything what our faith is all about. There's an interesting passage in 2 Corinthians 12, I believe it is, and it is St. Paul talking about being brought up into the third heaven. This is a powerful moment. St. Paul, which in a sense we would call a near-death experience today, it's also called a transpersonal experience. That's another name for it, but basically called a near-death experience. He has had this experience where he's seen a bigger reality than we can perceive humanly. And with that perspective, he teaches us of certain truths that we will not fully understand. And he actually said, eye has not seen, nor has ear heard, nor has it even dawned on man what it is that God has for those who love him. So he has this whole different focus, understanding of truth and reality. And with that understanding of truth and reality, he comes to us and speaks to us in a way that we can understand. This is St. Paul, but his understanding is far greater, and he can't talk about it because it's so big that we can't fully perceive what he would be saying. Do you understand? It's kind of like, this is something different. Someone brought this out a while ago. Now, I don't believe that we take the book of Revelation seriously. Not seriously, I take it seriously, literally. But someone brought up something that was kind of interesting. And that was, and I forget who it was, I think it was a Protestant preacher. He brought up the idea that what if the book of Revelation is describing an actual historical event in the future that was to happen on earth, and he's describing this with the language that he can use to help us understand what is beyond understanding. So you see these images in Revelation that just sound so outlandish, so extraterrestrial. But if you look at it this way, you can say, well, wait a minute. Maybe he's describing something that today we would understand, but obviously back then they wouldn't. What could he possibly be describing? It's just an interesting perspective. Nothing says, and I don't think the church teaches, that that's what the book of Revelation is all about. But you see that deeper understanding. You see, this is the whole thing, and this is one of the things I want to remind you of. When you want to understand what is happening, you need to realize that if you look at this, you look at the Bible cosmologically, you look at the words of Jesus from Jesus understanding all of the universe far beyond what we can understand, you realize St. Paul understood truths that he couldn't communicate. Now you realize there is this greater knowledge than our ability to fully understand it. And what we need to do is to humbly realize that's what our faith is all about. Then we understand the events that we see in the Bible from that perspective. And that's going to change everything, because it's going to lead us to understand, oh, the Lord is doing something that is greater than our ability to fully appreciate it, because we're not there yet. Always remember what I said earlier in the week. Time is a major factor. When you're considering the Lord, you have to realize everything is all about a truth moving through time and an understanding in truth that is growing. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. We'll be right back right after this. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. And don't forget, when you tune us in over at patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media, you'll be able to make comments on programs that will appear there before they appear on the podcast. So it gives you a chance to kind of make comments, say a few things, be like about the program, be almost like a producer. Actually, be like a producer. So think of that. And, consider that. Well, in any case, because your input is really helpful. So in any case, what we're looking at is this deeper understanding. Now, in the story today, we see that Joshua has received the power that Moses had. And we see that because he also crosses not the Red Sea, but the Jordan River. And he does it. This is one of the first times we see the Ark of the Covenant. Now, Moses made the Ark, and they created the Ark during the time of Moses. But we're really seeing the Ark in process. We're seeing it in its being used and being carried. The Ark of the Covenant was built according to the rules that the Lord gave to Moses, and in it was put the Ten Commandments. This is a predecessor to the tabernacles that you see in church, because the Ten Commandments represented the wisdom of God. The tablets represented the wisdom of God embodied in the tabernacle, in the Ark of the Covenant. We'll also call it the tabernacle, by the way. But in church, what do you see? You have the Eucharist inside the tabernacle, also telling us that the presence of God is there. The difference is there was one Ark of the Covenant. That's it. Only one. And now, when Jesus came, he became known as God is with us, or God with us. And therefore, the tabernacle is where there is a Catholic church. There's a tabernacle, and at least one in every Catholic church. And we recognize that as the as the presence of God. And people say, well, that doesn't make any sense to us. Again, you've got to think differently. And you've got to think in a different way. I remember when I was studying electronics, I might have told you the story, but when I was studying electronics for the Navy, and I was at Naval Training Center, and someone told me ahead of time, he had studied electronics himself, he says, you're going to come to a point, this stuff isn't going to make any sense to you, not at all. And you're going to be doing this, and you're not going to make any sense. You're going to, this is what I don't really get this. This is what they say, and this is what I'm going to try to do, and the whole bit. He says, but then you'll come to a point where all of a sudden it'll make sense. And what I've realized is you can think in it as well. So what happens is I was a sonar technician in the Navy. And that means I worked on electronics and I worked on plumbing, because the sonar system needed a very strong cooling system, because we had, none of this is confidential, what I'm about to tell you, roughly 56 units, all the size of refrigerators, with those, remember those old circuit cards they used to have? It used to have these, you may or may not remember, used to have like your TV, Motorola made these. You'd have a TV, a color TV at home. And a friend of mine had one of these, and he worked for, I think, Motorola. But anyway, and so you'd open up this console in the TV, and there'd be the circuit cards, and it was transistors and capacitors, and mostly transistors and resistors and stuff, because capacitors were hard to minimize. And my sonar system had 56 units filled from top to bottom with these circuit cards. So you can imagine how many components and everything that was there. And it came to a point when I worked with electronics enough that I could think in electronics and plumbing very easily. So I never thought of, well, what is this diode? I don't know. I said diode, check valve. Resistor, it's, a smaller pipe. It was all these different things. And I could think in electronics and in plumbing. Okay. So then when I fully understood, I could get this all figured out like nothing. Now, I want you to think about that in terms of Jesus speaking. He's speaking from a whole different perspective, because he understands all of the universe, because he is God. And even St. Paul understood more of the universe, because he went to the third heaven, as we understand in 2 Corinthians 12. And so they have this bigger understanding of our reality. And therefore, when they're speaking, but they're speaking in ways that you and I can understand. Not everything, but just enough of what we need to understand. Do you see that? Because we're not there yet to get the full picture. Jesus can do that because he is the Son of God. Paul could do some of that, certainly not to the same level, because he experienced something greater. This is a very powerful teaching from St. Teresa of Avila. St. Teresa of Avila was a mystic as well. So she had this incredibly powerful experiences of this intense relationship with God. So she was a mystic. And she said something that was fascinating. She said, do not envy those who have encouragements, is what she called her mystical experiences. Now, many mystics, they will always talk in the third person. So they will never say, well, as you can see in St. Paul never says, I was taken up to the third heaven. He says, I know someone who was taken up to the third heaven. You see that in St. Paul in 2 Corinthians. Well, St. Teresa of Avila did something similar. But she would always say, do not be envious of those who have these encouragements, because she would say they suffer. They really suffer. Now, she had an experience of what is known as the prayer of quiet. And what the prayer of quiet was for her, this intense mystical experience. I don't know if I can describe it well. It's described in her books, but it's this intense mystical experience. She had these intense mystical experiences. Well, I know this person who had this very intense mystical experience, I guess you could call it. I guess you'd put it that way. And you couldn't describe it. Could not describe it at all for years. And then he happened to be reading Way of Perfection by St. Teresa of Avila. And that exact experience he had was described by her in a book written 400 years ago. Obviously not his experience, but her experience, the exact genre type of experience. And that book was written 400 years ago, and he was fascinated. He says, yes, that's exactly what I went through. And this is a fascinating reality. And what does it say? It says that reality is bigger than our ability to understand it. And this is key. Without that infusion of God, we'd never be able to know or experience this. This is what we are all about. So what is the thing that makes the difference? The difference is time. Over time, our understanding and our ability to understand the reality that surrounds us grows. Over time, it grows. So as this happens over time and it grows, then we realize that this understanding, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, and I talked about that early in the week, as this understanding grows, that this is the news fair. This is the fact that human understanding grows over time. And when it grows over time, our ability to understand is built on the understanding of those ahead of us. And we grow in our understanding, and we get a bigger reality, a bigger comprehension of reality. Now, St. Augustine touched on this as well long before. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin died in the 1960s, or late 50s, early 60s. When he died, he was silenced by the church, so he wasn't allowed to publish, which was fascinating because it also shows, again, time, how God works. So after he died, his writings could be explored because he died. And that just opened the door to whole new understandings. Now, he didn't have everything correct at all. As a matter of fact, he could never figure out his theories and put them together with original sin. Later, people came along and said, oh, this all connects very easily. And they could. And so he had some things wrong, but he had some things right. Certain things he had wrong. He believed that Jesus was the fullness of human evolution. And later, theologians working the Vatican studied this and said, no, because that makes Jesus basically human. Jesus is God. And human, but he is God. So in any case, there's all kinds of things that some of it he got wrong, some of it he got right. But centuries ago, more than a millennia, St. Augustine brought up a similar idea. Because he says at the end of the Gospel of John, and some people have heard me explain this, St. John says, Jesus said and did so many things that there wouldn't be enough books in the world to contain all those accounts. And this is what he said. So we know that the Bibles are intensely limited accounts. But what St. Augustine said that means is that human understanding had to grow over time because human understanding is represented by all these books. There aren't enough books in the world to contain all these accounts. And human understanding is that similar limit. And it grows, and it continues to grow. And our understanding of the world now is different than our understanding of God now is different than it was then. But it's still growing. And we go back to that vessel that begins with Israel and continues through Christianity. And, you see that whole reality. This is what we see. And so we see this powerful reality, this powerful truth that we're still learning. Because remember, how people understood the Son in the time that the Gospel of John was written is different than people understand the Son today. But the Son has never changed. The Son has been the same all along. Our understanding changes. Our understanding of the universe changes. Our understanding of God changes. But they don't change. Do you see that? We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and we're continuing through this week. Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It is a holy day of obligation, and we're going to be looking at that and what does it mean and everything else. My favorite bad definition, and I may talk about this tomorrow. My favorite bad definition is when someone says this is what it means and they're completely wrong. My favorite bad definition is the Assumption of Mary is when we assume that Mary went to heaven. That's not what the Assumption of Mary is, but I had heard that someone told me they were at a parish long time ago. This is back when I was in California, and that's what the priest said. No, it is not the day we assume not the day we assume Mary went into heaven. It is the day we celebrate the Assumption of Mary, body and soul, into heaven. So that's what we're looking at tomorrow. Very powerful day. And it's that holy day of obligation towards the end of summer. And speaking of the book of Revelation, which I was doing before, our first reading is from the book of Revelation. We'll look at the readings tomorrow, see what we're going to talk about. But in the meantime, always keep in mind that we as Catholics believe Mary has a special role as the protectress. Is that right? The patroness of the church, protectress of the church as well. And we always keep that in mind. And she is the mother of the church. And we keep that whole thing in mind. And in understanding that, we recognize that this is a special day. So we'll be back tomorrow on your favorite podcast platform, CatholicAudiomedia.com.